My name is Harriet O'Neill. I'm delighted that this online audience could be with us tonight for an event that was planned by my predecessor, Peter Campbell, for last year in Rome, but unfortunately that wasn't able to happen. As many of you will know, my name is Harriet O'Neill, and I'm Assistant Director for the Fine Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences here at the BSR. And it is my absolute pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker and performer, Bettina Joy de Guzman. You would have had the opportunity to read the abstract and biography on the website, but just to say that she is a multi-instrumentalist, educator and classicist who composes music inspired by research of ancient cultures, especially ancient Greek music and poetry. She has been invited to lecture, sing authentic poetry and play historical instruments in various universities and also museums and on an international stage as well. As Regent's Fellow in the University of California in Irvine, she has taught ancient Greek and Roman history as well as mythology, and you'll see these interests come together tonight. The book she edited, Ancient Greek Lyre Learning Methods by Nikos Xanthoulis, you can correct me, who is the artistic consultant of the National Greek Opera, was shortlisted for the Good Life category of Greek Public Book Awards in June 2019. You may know Bettina is president of the California Classical Association South, where she organises panels twice a year. She's also co-curator and host of Cosmote TV, the history channel, Ancient Greek Culture Now, which is nice because she's performing in the contemporary moment, which aired in January 2021 in Greece. She is also the 2021 Associate and Grant Recipient and Visiting Artist for the Center for Hellenic Studies at Harvard University. So we really are privileged to have her perform tonight. I wanted to say that there's a few things we should be mindful of tonight. Firstly, the event is being recorded. It's going to be in two halves. We'll have Bettina's performance, where she will be tuning her instruments between songs. And during this phase, she will be muted, but we can see what she's up to, which is always fascinating. There'll be a 5-minute pause when you don't have to re-log in at all, just mute your, actually, in fact, Bettina will be muted and her video off, and we'll join after 5 minutes. And then we'll move into the lecture phase, which is 10 to 15 minutes, more of a talk about the instruments, which is absolutely fascinating, and I heard a little bit during our technical rehearsal. And then Bettina is going to look at the questions tonight and select them. So do send them in through the Q&A function. I will wave if there's any technical problems to Bettina, but I'm going to mute myself and stop the video and pass you over to Bettina, because that is the most important thing about tonight. So thank you so much, and thank you once again.
Homer, Iliad 1. Maiden, I hear the say The second song is Arma Virumque Cano. Virgil, one of Rome's greatest poets, lived in the Augustan age. He wrote three of the most famous poems in Latin literature, the Eclogues or Bucolics, the Georgics, and the Aeneid. Arms and a man I sing. So begins the epic of Virgil's Aeneid about the founding of the Roman people. Arms and a man I sing, who first from Troy's shores, exiled by fate, came to Italy and to the Lavinian seaboard, a man much battered on land and on the deep seas by the powers above, on account of Juno's unforgetting anger. Greatly too did he suffer in battle, up to the time he would found a city and introduce his gods to Latium. Latium, whence comes the Latin race, the elders of Alba and the walls of mighty Rome. Muse, bring to my mind the reasons. What slight to her divinity? What hurt was it that made the queen of the gods thrust a man famed for his dutifulness to churn over such tribulations and enter into such hardship? Can anger so great affect the minds of heavenly gods? Such was the spin of the fates. So great a task it was to establish the nation of Rome. Virgil, Aeneid, Book 1. The oldest complete piece of written music and lyrics found so far in history is the epitaph of Sikilos. It is anonymous and written around the 2nd century CE during the Roman era. It was engraved on an ancient burial stele at Asia Minor. This beautiful poem with concise musical notations was discovered and published by Ramsay in 1883, and the musical signs were deciphered not long after. The stone itself, long preserved in a particular collection, is now in the Copenhagen Museum. And so what we don't know is exactly what instruments were meant to be played with it. We don't know if this song is an original song. We don't know if it was a traditional song, and how was it really played otherwise during that time. So we know very little about the context. However, we do have the notes, and that's wonderful. The notes are in a particular mode, and so therefore people are free to put it in whatever key that they would like. You can do it in C major, you can do it in D major. Just to be different, I'm doing it in this particular key. All right, here we go. While you live, shine. Don't let anything let you down. I have now switched over to my barbitos. And originally, this would have been made of tortoiseshell. It is gut string. It is a hide and wood. And it's a replica, so this is actually made of wood, made to look like a tortoiseshell. This next song is by Mesomedis of Crete, who was a Greek lyric poet and composer. He was a freedman of the Emperor Hadrian and one of many scholars who lived in the museum at Alexandria in the early 2nd century AD. Before the Sikilos epitaph was discovered in the late 19th century, the hymns of Mesomnides were the only surviving written music from the ancient world, preserved through the Byzantine tradition. This hymn, written in Ionian, preserves the ancient musical notation written over the text. And this one is called the Hymn to the Muses, or at least modern historians have called it that. Ovid's Metamorphoses, Book 1, begins with, "I want to speak about bodies changed into new forms. Before the ocean and the lands appeared, before the sky had overspread them all, the face of nature in a vast expanse was nothing but chaos uniformly waste." This is the cosmogony. That's how it's commonly referred to, the beginning of the world, by Ovid, one of the greatest Roman poets along with Virgil. Animus mutatas digere formas, porotikoitis namuos mutastis atillas adspirate meis prima quam origine mundi ad mea perpetuum deducit et tempora Antemare terras et quod legitomia caelum unus erat toto naturae motus enorme quem dixere chaos rudis indigestaque moles neque quam nisi bonus imers congestaque iodem discordia seminararum Anteus et melior litem natura diremi nam caelo terras et terris abscidit unda et liquidum spissose creuit abaere caelum perpetuum deducit et tempora carmen The interesting thing about these instruments is you can have them made custom to your needs. And my needs was to make it as ancient as possible, which means that I didn't ask for certain things. And I think that's how I wanted it. I wanted to know what it was like for an ancient musician performing. And so there will be slippages in the tonality according to what the temperature is of the room, and just little things like that, which I think is just a part of the whole process in the performance. So I think I have this now. All right. This next song is by Sappho. Dedike mena selana. The moon and the Pleiades have set. It is midnight, and the time is passing, but I sleep alone. This poem is only 4 lines, which some argue is a fragment of a larger poem, while others argue it is complete. Written in Hegesichorian meter, which is a rather difficult meter, it is perhaps about the moon goddess yearning for her lover Endymion. Or is it about someone sleeping alone, enjoying the moonlight? The poem is usually attributed to Sappho, and often Sappho is depicted playing the barbitos, which has longer strings and a lower pitch, as you noted when I played a moment ago. And you could hear the difference between this lyre and the box lyre, the Kelis lyre versus the box lyre. And so now, Sappho, fragment 168b. Music is traditionally one of the healing elements. Thus, Asclepius, the god of healing, is the son of Apollo, god of music. The Homeric hymn to Pythian Apollo sings how Leto's all-glorious son goes to rocky Pytho, playing upon his hollow lyre, and his lyre, singing sweet. Then immediately the undying gods think only of the lyre and the song, and all the muses together, voice sweetly answering voice, sing. Here then is the Homeric hymn to Pythian Apollo. The Georgics by Virgil was likely published in 29 BCE. The subject of the poem is agricultural, but is usually seen not as an example of peaceful rural poetry, but having to do with the overall idea of labor, success, and failure of mankind's endeavors. I chose it for the interconnection of various labors of different spaces that come together, where it talks about the places where they have various spices from India, from Tmolus, where the Khalibes has iron, and so on. And so for me, these different spaces come together with the lovely poetry. This last song, which I will play on the lyre before I switch to the tympanon, or the frame drum, is from the Orphic hymns. The devotional Orphic hymns have been sung since antiquity. In Athens, Hygieia was invoked in libations by pouring water after washing of hands and before drinking in the symposium. Her worship as goddess of health is closely tied to Asclepius, god of medicine, who's said to be her father, sometimes said to be her husband, depending on the tradition. In the Hippocratic Oath, her name follows that of Asclepius. In this hymn, we sing, "Desired, beloved, much blooming all queen, hear me, blessed Hygieia, prosperity bringer, mother of all. Through you, diseases afflicting men vanish. Every house blossoms with much joy through you, and the arts thrive. The world desires you, O queen, ever youthful, ever beloved, a haven for mortals." The Orphic hymn to Hygieia. Sarate polithalmiae pambasileia, clusi macar Hygieia ferroviae meitera panto. Meiter hapanto. Meiter hapanto. Soimen apoptimitus ibratoisen, poste domostale poligetes heine casseio. Meiter hapanto. Caetec naebritosi, poteides cosmos anasa. Aita leise iuctaio tateit neitona na pauma, sugara terpantes tenanofile anthropoiseno. Meiter hapanto. This is Sophocles' Antigone, 5th Stasimon, where the chorus is invoking Bacchus, the god of Bacchic theories, and his frantic and raving bacchantes who dance through the night. It sets up the climax of the play where emotions overpour and the laws of the gods overpower reason and man's laws. This music, the melody, was originally written by Nikos Xanthoulis, who is the artistic consultant of National Greek Opera, and he wrote it for me to sing while he played the lyre. I have since adapted it with his permission to put it on the tympanon. And I have included ancient Greek along with the English translation that he had used. And the English translation was written by Robert Littman and Ruth Fainlight. And so this is the adapted version from the lyre. I put it into the frame drum. And I have included the ancient Greek, which is in a very difficult lyric meter to give you the idea of the drive that you would hear if it were entirely in ancient Greek, and yet still give you the meaning of the song. Zeus, you who keep watch in far-famed Italy, who on the bosomy hills of Demeter's Eleusis are worshipped by many. O Bacchus, god of the mother city of Bacchic Thebes, on the banks of the swift stream Ismenus, where the wild dragon's teeth were scattered. O Bacchus. That concludes the 10 songs which I had planned out to perform. I hope you enjoyed it. I will be needing a 5-minute break just to set up for the PowerPoint and discussion afterwards. Okay, so regarding ancient music, instruments, and performance, I just have some general overviews here. If I were, if this were just an academic lecture, it's a very different PowerPoint I would give you. But generally, after a performance, people want to know some things, and so I'll try to answer it through this. Oops. So, history and context. What do we know? Well, for example, if we take a look at this, this is a male harp player of the early Speedos type, and this is near me, the Getty Villa. And it was the place created was in the Cyclades Islands in Greece, and Bronze Age, 2700 to 2300 BC, roughly, made of marble. Okay, that's what we know. But what we don't know, here we go. Many assume by looking at this, that this is a bard, but we have no real context. Who was the audience? The performer. Was he improvising? Is it a she? We can't really tell. It's assumed to be a he, according to the conventions of the other sculptures during that period and that space. How many strings? What type of strings? Now, the type of strings really absolutely matters, because, for instance, I had actually played 2 different types of strings. One is nylon and one is gut. The nylon strings are for modern, really for me to bring it back and forth. And so that's with a formix. I brought you that. And it's got a sharper sound. But then I was playing with a gut string, which is much more traditional. However, the other string that I did not perform with is silk. So it could have been silk strings. It's a lot quieter. So it depends on the space that you're performing it for, or maybe it's just for yourself. We don't know what material was the frame of this harp. Now, looking at this, it could have been a harp. It could be a lyre. The difference is that the harp, the strings go straight into the soundboard, whereas the lyre, it's over it. It goes over it. Okay, so how big was the room that he would have played in? Where would it have been, and why? What was the purpose of the performance? And now let's go even meta. Why was the sculpture made? Were musicians important during this period in time in that space? Is this a memorial for someone who just really liked music? These are the things we don't know. Okay. And here is something very important. We can play the music on modern instruments, but until we try the replica ancient instruments, we don't know the limitations and possibilities that the performers faced. This is an object that most people ask about, the Queen's Lyre, which was from southern Iraq and Sumerian, about 2600 to 2400 BC from Ur. And what we see is lapis lazuli, shell, red limestone, and gold here from the bowl. It's excavated. It was excavated by Woolley, and presently it's in the British Museum. Here is a picture so you can see how big this was. Archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley holding a plaster mold of the Sumerian Queen's Lyre during the excavations of the royal cemeteries of Ur, 1922. The wooden parts of the lyre had decayed in the soil. So Woolley poured plaster of Paris into the depression left by the vanished wood. So he's already holding here the plaster mold. And you can see the bull face over here. Therefore, it's reconstructed entirely. Reconstructed, or most of it, reconstructed wooden parts, pegs and string, and the horns are modern. What we have is just the general idea of the framework, and we have the original lapis lazuli shell and red limestone. The gold mask of the bull box had been crushed and had to be restored. So, you know, this is what we have. Now, according to Rimmer, Ancient Musical Instruments of Western Asia in the British Museum, one woman lay right against the lyre. Okay, so against the pit wall were the bodies of 10 women with fine jewelry, numerous stone and metal vessels. What we can figure out from there, well, I'm sure there are many theories, but what we do know is one woman lay right against the lyre, and according to Woolley, the bones of her hands were placed where the strings would have been. Can we then assume that women could play the lyre? I think we can. Can we assume anything else? No, not really. I have colleagues who have a replica of this particular lyre, and they've played it, and they played it with a collops. Now this here is collops rather than pegs, and you know, they face the same problems of tuning and so forth that I have, and the same problems of you know, what kind of string would be best. But it's still a delightful feeling to work with that and try to get the idea of what a performer back then would have been going through. Here's another object that most people ask about. This is a close-up of the sarcophagus of Aia Triada from 1600 to 1450 BC. It is one of the oldest Greek depictions of a lyre. Here's the lyre over here, this one. It's a detail. And what are we looking at here? Appears to be an altar adorned with double axes. A woman is followed by another woman, and there's a lyre player. And that's pretty much all we know. Here, let's take a look at this one. This is the pizza panel. We see an animal sacrifice. That seems to be pretty clear. Found 6th century BC, so sometime later. What else do we see? We see the double aulos here and a lyre accompanying the sacrifice. And this panel is made of wood, and we have mineral pigments. And it's found in 1934 near Sicyon, Carinthia, in a cave above the village of Pisa. And we see names Eftidika or Eustidika, Eucolis, Etelonka. On the side is the name of the painter, and this is currently at the National Archaeological Museum of Athens. Now, these, from with different instruments and locations, they seem to have a similar purpose for the musicians. Some sort of sacrifice or maybe libation going on here and sacrifice here. There are sadly no musical notations nor lyrics associated with these. Okay, so there are many depictions by the time we get to the Archaic period on Greek faces. And so here's this wonderful depiction here of what I call the forminx, and the instrument makers who make them, luthieros, calls it the forminx. This is the rounded box lyre here, and then you can see that they have the Kelis lyre here. This is generally labeled a music lesson and seems to indicate the importance of music in Greek education or in Greek culture. Now, as you've heard, these two lyres sound quite different from each other. And what else do we see here? We see, a student, a scribe, or a poet here with the musicians, clearly writing something. It's very interesting. And we see the double aulos again over here, and different other musical instruments here. Now, Sappho, I picked this depiction not with a barbitos this time because this intrigued me. This is a depiction from the Archaic period, and she seems to be holding notations or lyrics. I like this. Does this indicate a music lesson? Is it before a performance? Is someone handing her this to teach or to play? We don't know, but you notice this is more like my lyre, the last lyre that I played, rather than a barbitos. We see here actors or performers and the double aulos. All right, the double aulos is loud. It is more like a bagpipe. So it was typically played with a chorus. And until I handled a replica, I did not realize how loud it was nor how difficult it was to play as compared to a recorder type or a flute. Now, Greek bagpipes have existed or have been on record since the 1500s AD in the islands, and there's been a revival of it. So you could Google it, and it's absolutely wonderful hearing performers. Here's the double aulos player wearing a cheek mask to keep the strain from happening. And once again, aulos is different from a recorder or a flute in terms of effort when you play. You puff up your face, you really do. It's the only way to do it. And it's circular breathing can be used. Here's another example of box lyre or kithara. Now I have many, many different lyres, including the Cretan lyre, which is more, which is a bow type instrument. And I just don't, if this were all about me demonstrating each one, it would be more like an hour and a half demonstrating the sounds of each one. But yes, this is another type of box lyre and kithara. You could see that kithara this is where you get the word guitar from. Okay, what other kinds of musical instruments were there? There's the angular harp. And I wanted to point out that this particular angular harp, especially this one actually, looks virtually unchanged and is still played in Uganda today. You can see here, this person is playing a long maybe wind instrument, maybe metallic, we don't know. There's also this long-necked oud type, which I do have as well. And don't really know what that is. Maybe a lyre, I'm not sure. Okay, so this depiction is from the tomb chapel and around 1333 to 1307 BC from Egypt. What we see here are tuning pegs, and there are 8 strings, and it seems to be played by a male, and he's sitting down. Here's the large angular harp. Now this one, 1550 to 1292 BC, someplace there, New Kingdom. And this is from this fabulous book, 4,000 Years of Art. The soundboard is at the bottom, and the tuning pegs, again, we see are above, and they're 10 strings. So we can see the variation of the number of strings. This is the mantinea bass, attributed to Praxiteles. And we see here what's usually depicted, or what's usually interpreted as Apollo, Marcia, Silenus, and generally 3 muses here, more unknown over here. And this is from the National Archaeological Museum of Athens. I'm just, I'm showing a picture with me so you can see how big this is, because oftentimes people don't actually know, they just see an image of one of them, usually this one. This is a muse playing a panduras. This is long-necked oud, similar to the one that we saw in the Egyptian depictions. Long-necked ouds have been around for thousands of years, and it's still used today. The oud with the short necks are the common Mediterranean musical instruments, such as the bouzouki or the mandolin. It has, I don't want to say it evolved as if that's the final form, but that's the musical instruments that we usually see. Okay, all right. Now here is something I do want to point out. So I played in the National Archaeological Museum for the Hadrian exhibit, and I played in a small room with Nikos Xanthoulis and an invited audience, around 40 people. And playing in a room with stone statues is very loud, even with a room full of people. This is something that you don't know until you do it. So it was very echoey, and it was really an experience. Okay, now acoustic studies of theater spaces are still ongoing. There's been all sorts of theories of how loud is it, depending on the audience and depending on the material of the seats and so on. And now I understand why they're bringing it up with the stones, stone seats and so on. Now I see why that matters. Okay, there were also metallic percussions, which were used in various cultures for religious hymns, perhaps as accompaniment as well, but the depictions are usually religious. For instance, here's a sistrum of the singer of Ammon and Isis in 1069 to 664 BC in the 3rd intermediate period. And it's bronze. That one is found in the Louvre. And here's a pair of finger cymbals, which are still used today, especially among belly dancers. This was found during the Archaic period. And this is now in the British Museum, and it's generally unchanged. You put you put them together, so it's usually with a string, and then you clap them together. And depending on the size, the type of metal used, the tone is different, and the sound can be loud. Okay, and finally, we get the tympanon here. It looks like a tympanon anyway. There's a bronze statuette of Cybele on a cart drawn by lions, mid imperial, second half of 2nd century AD. It's bronze. It's found in the Metropolitan Museum. And we can compare it to a painted wooden figure of a dancing bess holding what seems to be a tambourine standing on a lotus. And this one is 1300 BC in Upper Egypt. And we can compare it again to the triumph of Dionysus with a Maenad playing a tympanum, Roman mosaic from Tunisia, 3rd century. So the purposes of an instrument may change or may simply be different across various cultures. And at last, we get to the epitaph of Xanthoulis here. Now, I had sung actually the epitaph as well as the song. And as I promised, I'm going to talk about it here. This is, again, a 2nd or 3rd century AD even. So it could be pushed as late as 3rd century AD. And it says up above here, I am a tombstone, an image. Xanthoulis placed me here, an everlasting sign of deathless remembrance. Now, when I sang it in almost modern Greek pronunciation as well. You know, I also sang the Hymn to the Muse by Mesomedis in almost modern Greek pronunciation because we think that that's what it sounded like at the time. So you'll notice I did change pronunciation when I was doing, for instance, the Fistacimon of Bacchus. I was doing more of the classical type pronunciation, and this is more modern. So here's another translation here. All thy life face the world, never give thyself over to grief. Only a short time is ours to live. Time will demand of us soon the end. There are many, many ways to translate this short poem. I even translated it into Tagalog myself just to see if it strikes a different meaning with me if it's in my my native language, and it did actually. So what did the notations look like? Here's a close-up of the notations here. The notations don't indicate exact note per note. Like if you see a seed, is it a C here? No. It's, West and Pullman certainly have done so much study and have written wonderful things that explain how they figured all this out. And it's still ongoing, and there are many studies by Armand Dangour, for instance, that talk about the notations and what do you do with it. The Hymn to the Muses and Apollo, this is that one. It's not the one that I sang. This is a little different, but this was a clear image. And you could see here that these are the lyrics, and then we have the notations here. Okay, there we go. And the notations are indicating not exact notes, not actually the notes as we know it, like on a keyboard, like that, but more like a general spacing, and we get the idea of a key by figuring out where it seems to be centering. And of course, the words key and tonos and mode get all sort of mixed up together. And I can't emphasize enough that Martin West's 1992, I believe, Ancient Greek Music is fabulous, and Pullman and West's Documents of Ancient Greek Music. I keep referring to those over and over again. They're just phenomenal. I know I've gone over time. I'm so sorry. So now I'm ready to look at the Q&A. So we see here, would performers retune their lyre to different modes for each song? Oh yeah, for sure, I would say yes. However, there's also this thing, and I want to leave you with this. Also related questions, were there different modes for the vocalization and the accompaniment? Yes. How do you approach the melodies if you're reconstructing or freely composing? Okay, so again, I think the best way to get to know that is by reading on it, because it's not one of those quick little things I can answer. It just takes so much study to figure out how do you know how that what you're singing is accurate. Do you want to be accurate? And like the epitaph of Xanthoulis, is as close as we can get, and the hymn to the Muse is as close as we can get to knowing what the notes were. But again, that's the melody, not the harmony. Okay, what I wanted to show you is this. Okay. But I can pull it. All right, and depending on how big the room is, you can hear that it changes. Now, qualitatively, I just wanted to keep a homogeneous sound, and so I took the time to try to use the pegs. But certainly, if you had a collops, you can imitate the sound of your voice going up and down. And this is where we get quarter tones and semitones and whole tones. And if you didn't have the instrument in front of you, you wouldn't know that, wow, they really can do that, as if it were on a soundboard, as if it were a fretted instrument, as if it were a guitar. You could slide it up and down, as if it were a violin. But yes, absolutely. The possibilities are there. And that concludes my talk. And it looks like that's all the questions that are there.